There's something uncomfortable about happiness, not your happiness, other people's happiness. Because when someone around you starts glowing differently, when they start healing, when they stop complaining, when they stop chasing validation, it creates a silent tension in the room. And here's the truth most people will never admit. Some people don't get upset when you fail. They get upset when you no longer need them. They don't get triggered by your struggle. They get triggered by your peace, because your happiness forces them to confront a question they've been avoiding for years. Why don't I feel that way? And that question can feel like an attack. Think back to when you were at your lowest. Maybe you were insecure, maybe you were heartbroken, maybe you were broke, maybe you were confused about your future. People were around you then, they checked in, they offered advice, they gave sympathy. Some even felt close to you during that time, but then something changed. You started working on yourself, you went to therapy, you started reading, you set boundaries, you stopped explaining yourself, you stopped over-texting, you stopped begging for clarity. And slowly, you became calm, not loud, not arrogant, just calm. And that calmness started making people uncomfortable. You noticed it, the subtle tone change, the shorter replies, the fake smiles, the quiet competition. When you talked about something good happening in your life, the room didn't light up, it tightened. Some people congratulated you, but you could feel something underneath it. Comparison. Because happiness creates contrast, and contrast reveals gaps. The gap between where you are and where they wish they were. The gap between your growth and their stagnation. The gap between your peace and their chaos. And not everyone is emotionally mature enough to sit with that discomfort. Let's talk about what's happening in the brain. Humans are wired for comparison. It's automatic. If we measure ourselves through other people, income, relationships, confidence, physical appearance, social success. When someone close to you becomes happier or more successful, your brain doesn't just celebrate, it evaluates. If they did it, why haven't I? That thought can either inspire growth or trigger insecurity. Emotionally secure people feel inspired. Insecure people feel threatened. Because your happiness becomes evidence. Evidence that change is possible. Evidence that excuses are weak. Evidence that effort works. And that evidence challenges their comfort zone. Here's something darker. Some people liked you better when you were struggling. Not because they wanted you to suffer, but because your struggle kept the power dynamic balanced. When you were insecure, you were easier to control. When you lacked confidence, you tolerated more. When you feared losing them, you accepted less respect. But happiness changes your standards, and higher standards remove access. Suddenly you don't respond to manipulation, you don't react emotionally to bait, you don't chase closure, you don't beg for reassurance. And that emotional independence feels like rejection to someone who once had influence over you. So what looks like jealousy is often a loss of control. Jealousy isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up as sarcastic jokes, backhanded compliments, passive-aggressive advice, emotional distance. You've changed. Yes, you changed. You healed. But what they really mean is, you don't revolve around me anymore. Your happiness becomes an ego wound for them. Because it proves that your life improved without their permission, without their approval, without their control. And that disrupts their internal narrative. In today's world, this dynamic is amplified. Social media has made happiness visible. You post a photo, you share progress, you show confidence. And even if you're not bragging, people compare constantly. Comparison online is brutal because people only see outcomes, not the breakdowns, not the anxiety, not the work behind it. So your highlight reel gets compared to their behind the scenes struggle, and resentment quietly grows. Not because you did anything wrong, but because visibility magnifies insecurity. Most jealous people won't say, "I feel insecure around you." Instead, they'll say, "You think you're better now." But confidence and superiority are not the same thing. Confidence says, "I know my value." Superiority says, "I'm above you." You chose confidence. They interpreted superiority. Because insecure minds distort neutral growth into personal attacks. When you grow, two types of people appear. The first type says, "If they can do it, so can I." They feel inspired, they ask questions, they grow with you. The second type says, "If I'm not ahead, they shouldn't be either." They compete silently. They downplay your wins. They withdraw emotionally. Your happiness filters people, and filtering is necessary. Not everyone is meant to access the version of you that you fought to become. Here's the mature perspective. Jealousy isn't always evil. Sometimes it's unhealed pain. Sometimes it's someone realizing they abandoned their own potential. But that's not your responsibility to fix. You are not required to shrink your growth to protect someone else's comfort. You are not obligated to dim your light because it exposes someone else's shadow. If someone distances themselves because you're thriving, let them. If someone becomes colder because you found peace, let them. Your happiness is not an attack, it's proof. Proof that healing works. Proof that discipline pays off. Proof that boundaries create peace. And if that proof makes someone uncomfortable, that's their reflection to face, not yours. Keep growing. Keep glowing. And understand this: if your happiness triggers someone, it was never your joy that threatened them. It was the mirror you unintentionally held up.